This What's Working with Cam Marston podcast is brought to you courtesy of Michelob Ultra Beer.
They say consistency is the key to success. They weren't wrong. So how about grabbing a beer that's consistently smooth, consistently refreshing, and consistently light? You might just find that the road to success can be pretty enjoyable. Michelob Ultra, the perfect balance of taste and refreshment, and only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Enjoy responsibly. Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Welcome, everyone, to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is the radio show / podcast designed to bring you insights into the workplace, the workforce, and the marketplace around you. Always trying to find people who can give me insights on the trends shaping their business. So maybe there's something that they say that will help us get a little bit better at whatever it is that we do. Again, welcome. Thank you for joining me along for the ride. As I sit here in the studio, I hold in my hand I guess it's about 20 inches long, a piece of aluminum, metal, something. It's hollow in the middle. One end is threaded. The other end is not. It's very small. It's about the width of my index finger. And it is what I call, and what my family calls, the rods. There are two of them. And these were inserted into my femurs when I was 15 years old, snow skiing out in Colorado at a high rate of speed, and came to a sudden stop on a tree and broke both those femurs. I was put into a toboggan or something like that. My memory's very hazy of that day, and brought to the bottom of the mountain where it seems to me orthopedists just wait for their afternoon work to come in. And I was some guy's afternoon work. He brought me in, and at the time, my parents understandably were freaking out. They're calling their friends back here in Mobile saying, hey, he's just broken his femurs. We don't know anything about the doctors out there. We don't know anything about the hospitals where we are. They were there with me. What do we do? And the doctors in Mobile had told, if I recall this correctly, and I don't want to, my memory seems to say, the doctor said, this is bad news. Very seldom does someone break both femurs. They're going to put him in a body cast, and he's going to have to be in that body cast, which will come all the way up to his armpits for 6 months. And after that, we'll determine whether he can walk again. So be prepared. You're going to be out there for a long while. Into my hospital room, this is the story my parents told. Into my hospital room walks the doctor. He's wearing blue jeans and a ski jacket. He is not wearing a white surgical coat as we can picture doctors wearing with a stethoscope in the pocket. He's wearing a white surgical coat. And he says, my name is, and I should remember his name. He was instrumental to me. My name is, and I will be taking care of your son. And here's what we're going to do. And he began to describe the process of putting these rods into my femurs. We're going to drill a hole at the top of the bone. We're going to tap this thing into place. We're going to wire it back together, do what we have to. The bone will grow back around this rod. This rod will be used as a guide for the bone. My parents sat there with wide-eyed wonder going, we've never heard of this before. It turns out this doctor was the doctor for the U.S. ski team. And he was on a cutting edge of technology that at that time had not yet reached Mobile, Alabama. Today, of course, it has, but at the time it was very new. And I stayed in that hospital out there for a month. And rather than 6 months, I stayed there for a month. I flew back home, and 1 year later, I walked into the hospital here in Mobile, checked myself in, essentially. My parents and I checked me in. And the rods were taken out 1 year later. A year, maybe 2 years after that, ran my first marathon. And what we've seen in our lifetime, for those of you listening, regardless how old you are, is an extraordinary leap forward in orthopedic technology. from this rod that I hold in my hand, which when I show it to orthopedists, they laugh and they roll their eyes and they say that's old school stuff. This rod that I hold in my hands enabled me to walk again. To what we're going to get into after the break. Dr. Matt Barber is an orthopedic surgeon who is known, at least in my point of view, as a guy who's always trying to stay cutting edge in his specialty. And we're going to get him in the studio after break and talk about changes in orthopedic surgery, what's going on out there, what we can expect in the future. You're listening to What's Working. When we come back from break, you're going to meet a very interesting man at the top of his game, Dr. Matt Barber. You're listening to What's Working. We'll be right back.
When making the largest investment choice in most families' financial portfolio, you need a realtor who truly understands the market and can negotiate favorable terms and conditions. I'm Angelo DiPaola, the Coastal Connection with eXp Realty, the preferred real estate advisor for buying or selling along the Gulf Coast. For full access to the MLS in Mobile, Baldwin County, Pensacola, Destin, or Panama City, just Google Angelo DiPaola, the Coastal Connection.
We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. I'm in the studio early this Thursday morning. It's the only time I could get on Dr. Matt Barber's schedule. Dr. Barber is an orthopedic surgeon here in Mobile. We're going to talk about the advances in orthopedic technology, and we got a lot of things queued up. Dr. Barber, thank you for your time. Welcome to What's Working.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about your background. Introduce yourself to my listeners, if you would, please.
I'm an orthopedic surgeon, as you said, here in Mobile, specializing in joint replacement surgery of the knee and hip and all things related to that.
You are somewhat prolific in your approach, in your notoriety, let's say. Notoriety can have a couple different meanings to it, but you're very progressive, let's say, on your promotion of new orthopedic technology. That's the way I read it. You were just recently at a convention out in somewhere, and a lot of posts about technology that was coming along the way. It seems to me the leaps forward in technology in your part of the medical practice have been remarkable, significant. And in my hand, I hold a 3D printed model of what looks like the top of a femur. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And this was created, this is a model, this is not what would actually be used, but it was created specifically for a patient based on, I think you said it was a male, his CAT scan. Let's talk a little bit about the advances in technology, where they've come from, and what they mean to the patient.
Well, it depends on the time frame that you're talking about. Obviously, the advances in orthopedics have been tremendous over the years. If you go back to the early and even first half of the 20th century, orthopedic surgeons were the strap and buckle doctors. Think braces like Forrest Gump or cast or things like that. And then subsequently evolved the ability to fix fractures internally, as you have some experience with, and then the ability to replace joints. And so those were pretty revolutionary advances. And then those things have continued to evolve. And now we're living in an era where we're seeing robotics, we're seeing 3D printing, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, mixed reality, a lot of these technologies that are in play in other industries and in other spaces that are moving into orthopedics.
It seems to me that, and this sounds weird, but the doctor in all this technology is actually moving further from the patient in the actual application of the surgery, of the procedures that you may do. You're now in a corner with a headset on, operating a joystick, for lack of a better term, doing a lot of the work. The technology is actually, the incisions are smaller. Everything you're doing is less intrusive, less contact with the patient. Am I right?
Yes and no. So the part with the joystick operated portion from the corner translates more to general surgery, urology, GYN, some other fields that use robotics a little bit differently. In orthopedics, we're not at that full hands-off stage, and I shouldn't say hands off because the surgeon is still driving that technology, but just the spatial relationships with the patient and the physical nature of what we do with orthopedic care, we're still very much there in it. But your point is there. There is sort of this overlay of man and machine and the emergence of technology there, and in some ways that's good, and in some ways we just have to be judicious about how we integrate that.
So if I'm going to get let's talk about these 3D models here. If I'm going to get a hip replacement, you said your specialty was hip and knee, did you?
Yes.
If I'm going to get a hip replacement and I want one of these custom models that I'm holding here in my hand, tell me how this thing is made. Recognizing, of course, that what I'm holding here is not the actual item that would be used. This is plastic. The actual item is metallic. Is that correct?
Correct. So you've got a knee model there, and let's just make it a knee replacement for the purposes of this discussion, but it works for hips too. So in this instance, this is done with a CT scan, as you mentioned. So there's a three-dimensional model made of your anatomy, and that's very specific. Even if you unpack that a little further, what we're seeing now is the evolution where basically now or very soon that won't even require the CT scan. We'll be able to use a few two-dimensional x-rays, and the AI algorithm will produce those 3D images that are still specific to you. But with any of that, where you have this three-dimensional model created, then you can make patient-specific guides like you've got here as well, or patient-specific implants that only fit one person. So their size and shape matched to be closer to that patient's natural anatomy.
So this, what I'm holding here, you said is a knee?
Yes.
If I create one of these, this is the top part of the knee bone, I'm guessing. Please forgive my lack of anatomical
You're doing great.
Terminology. I don't have to produce the bottom half because this one's custom made for me. I would imagine back in the day, if I'm getting a knee replacement, I need a top and a bottom. But this one, since it's custom made for me, is going to fit perfectly into the bottom.
Yes and no. I mean, you're sort of speaking to partial versus total knee replacement and what that looks like, but it kind of reaches back to some of your overarching points about things progressively getting a little bit less invasive and a little more tailored. I think when you have three-dimensional modeling and you have custom guides and the ability to produce some of these more custom implant situations, you can do that often with taking away less bone. You have things that are more fitted.
So I'm holding here a template for the screws I see, but imagine that I come in with severe knee pain. I was in an accident, a car accident, hypothetically, and you say, Cam, bad news, buddy, your knee's crushed. You're going to need a new one. How long does it take for you to whip one of these replacement knees up?
So if you're talking about a set of customized instruments or a custom knee replacement, you're in the probably 4 to 6 week range.
No kidding. So it's not something you do over in the corner.
No.
You mail off for this. You send, I imagine there's a lot of technology involved of here's the scan, please send this back to me. It's not something you do, it's something you buy.
Correct.
Yeah. And is there a waiting list for this type of stuff that you got to get into the queue?
Yes and no. I mean, I think you can assume that any of these companies that produce these type of implants have some limits to their production capacity, but typically there's not a backlog with that. And
they send it to you UPS, or is there a guy locally who's going to hand it to you and stand there while you insert it to make sure someone's...
Both. They're just like any other implant, packaged sterile and then sent by FedEx, UPS to the hospital, to the surgery center, or to the rep that may be delivering that or helping with the surgery.
So what I'm holding here has a number of, I'm going to call them imperfections, bumps and cavities.
Yeah, exactly. Those are bone spurs that go along with that patient.
That is exactly what that patient's
correct
body part looked like. It's not smooth and beautiful like you see, like I would imagine.
Right.
This is what age
or like it was at one time.
Age and time have done this to this patient.
Yes.
So when you were in, again, you posted on social media, and I want to talk about that perhaps in the next segment. When you were in these conventions these past several weeks and I was watching all your content post up, What out there excited you the most?
Ooh, good question. A lot of the things that we've already talked about, some of these technologies that are there, I think some steps being made in robotics to get smaller and more handheld for those systems to potentially be a little more autonomous. That was pretty cool. I saw a couple of things with some mixed reality, augmented reality, where we're really starting to get to fruition with something that is anatomic to the patient. In other words, the surgeon would have on a headset that would project the patient's anatomy over them, so I can see internally where their bones are, where these anatomical structures are. To really
Is this in real time?
In real time.
That's pretty cool.
That's
so you've
amazing.
got a headset and you're working in there and you can see it. I'm trying to imagine what this would look like on a big screen in front of you where your instruments are.
Yeah, well, and really not even on a screen, but in your eyes, I mean, projected over the patient. And so, for example, with a hip replacement, you're making that surgical exposure. And to your point, you're trying to make those exposures smaller and less invasive. But there are, where is the bony anatomy beneath that? You want to see what you need to see to put these implants in. But this really projects that three-dimensional anatomy where you can see it, as you said, in real time.
Is this going to change what it takes to become an orthopedist? Because there is a stereotype of orthopedists, which I love, are suddenly you're going to have to start recruiting gamers versus athletes. Most orthopedists that I know are former athletes and current athletes, many of them. But is it going to demand something new of an orthopedist?
It's going to add to the skill set. I mean, just like you saw that transition to, long ago, orthopedics was much less surgical, if you will. It was surgical, but a lot of things were treated with cast, with braces, things like that same fracture patterns now we would treat with surgery.
Is it still going to attract the gunslinger reputation of the orthopedist?
I think it's going to hopefully continue to attract the best and brightest just because it is so interesting and so engaging. And I think those technologies just add to that. When
we come back, we're coming up for break here in a moment, but I want to talk a little bit about the extraordinary use of social media. I've had shows recently on why this should matter to a guy like me. You seem to be a poster child for how this stuff can be very effective with you. It seems that your preferred medium is LinkedIn. So the question, how does an orthopedist use social media? What's the benefit? You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. We'll be right back. I'm in the studio with Dr. Matt Barber.
I'm Paul Lewis, General Manager for Lewis Construction. Many of our commercial buildings you drive by daily on both sides of the bay are the fruits of our client relationship since our beginning in the early 80s. It is our mission to bring value to our clients, from retrofits to ground-up construction and everything in between. We have more advocates than any of our competitors who have been in business twice as long. Same with repeat business, same with referrals. Find us online at roylewisconstruction.com and let's talk about your next commercial project.
We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Dr. Matt Barber sitting across from me in the studio today. In my hands, I'm holding I think it's the bottom part of a knee and the template. We didn't get into this, Matt, in the previous segment. The template that tells you exactly how to put it in. So I think the knee joint is pretty cool that I'm holding, but I suspect that the true magic is in this template. Tell me about the template and what this thing is called. And I see, what is this, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different holes in it that I guess are guides for bits or something?
Yeah. So traditionally with manual instrumentation, with a knee replacement, the surgeon puts a set of guides in, and those are reference to the patient's anatomy and some metal sticks, for lack of a better term, very sort of rudimentary carpentry tools. This is the modern iteration of that. You've got a 3D printed guide, and those holes that you see are what allows pin placement to secure that to the bone. And then certain segments of the bone can be cut away to prepare for an implant. So you've got a plan there that's very specific and that's very accurate.
Back in the day, how long did a knee, let's take a total knee replacement. Back in the day, how long did a total knee replacement take? Today, how long do they take?
That is very, very surgeon specific.
Is that an unfair question? I'm revealing what I don't know.
No, it's not an unfair question. I think that a lot of the instrumentation can make this more efficient. In the early days, a lot of things had to be really almost done freehand. And so some of the advancements were with those, I call them rudimentary, but those carpentry tools and those instrumentation systems really made knee replacement at scale possible. Mm-hmm. And timing is, surgery always needs to be efficient. And if it takes a really long time, then it's something really complicated or there's something that has deviated from the plan, perhaps. But that varies. You have some surgeons that take a long time, some that are, blindingly fast. I try to be efficient, not skip steps, do what we need to do, but be efficient with what we do.
On the table next to you are the rods that were in my leg when I was 15. Those were given to me. I bought them. And what I had to do to get them was break both femurs on a skiing accident in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. The story with those rods, they were put in by the doctor who was at the time the U.S. ski team doctor. But when I got home to Mobile, no one had ever heard or seen of this thing. Maybe they'd heard of it. But the story from Dr. Bob McGinley, who's a legend in my world, nice guy because he helped me. I walk today because of him. Was that it took him hours to get those things out. He and Dr. Park were banging. Someone said they walked by the surgery room and looked in there, and they had sweated through their clothes, banging with hammers trying to get these things out.
You can only look stupid taking out hardware.
I think that's an industry quotable thing, huh?
Absolutely. I didn't make that one up, but that is absolutely true.
Let's talk about the social media use that you use. There's a lot of rich content here in the surgery, in the technology of that, and I want to get back into that. But and this is a conversation, as I said before, that I've been having with a number of people. To introduce you to my listener, Matt, typically going to be a 45-year-old or older, typically going to be a male, not entirely, but typically going to be male. He or she is in an influencer position in their business. They're either the owner, they're a manager, they're the second, third generation, whatever it may be. We are creating the show to attract that listener. So he or she is likely with the same attitude I have, which is prove to me that this more extraordinary amount of time on social media is going to be fruitful for me. I need to know that my efforts in doing this are going to be lead generators. You seem to have a remarkable presence out there. And let's face it, you're in this studio today because of what I saw from you in your travels recently at these conventions. What does all this stuff do for you, a surgeon?
Well, you have to understand that I came at this with no expectations. I quite honestly have the coolest job in the world. And a couple of years ago, I just went at this with the idea of what would happen if I just opened the door. And
open the door on what you do.
Well, what I do.
Let people see it.
Showed people and talked about it and tried to be as real with it as decency would permit.
Yeah.
And that's what opened it up for me. In terms of what they should understand about social media, it's just that it's where people are.
Yeah.
This is where people gather and where they are. And it's not fundamentally different than how things were before. In any business, most likely your best referrals are word of mouth. Satisfied customers telling other people. Word of mouth just looks different now. Word of mouth happens on a phone and on a social media platform.
You seem to take a pleasure in it. They have optimism in them. They have fun in what you do. And I think your primary channel is LinkedIn. Is that something you've done intentionally?
No, I love what I do, and I think that comes through. And, as I specialize, I have the luxury to just think about and talk about these specific things that are very important to me. And I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and everywhere else. And there are different things and different audiences and different ways of communicating on all those different platforms, and I just enjoy it.
How many of your patients that you will see today are aware of your social media presence?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Would you say you've generated new patients as a result of your presence? Somebody said, I need a new knee. This thing is hurting. This guy seems to know what he's doing because I've seen him on blank.
Yeah, 100% that happens. And there's some deeper conversations about social media and what that means. But yeah, people know me from there. I had a gentleman in the office from North Carolina week before last because he had seen me on YouTube and just kind of connected with what I was talking about. And he reached out and we talked a little bit by phone, and he's like, yeah, I want to come see you and let you look at my knee and let's talk about this.
I love it that somebody is coming from North Carolina to South Alabama to get medical treatment. This is not the normal way.
It's the normal way now. It's the internet at scale. It's the democratization of this information, and people have access to it, and so they can seek that out. Now, you are dealing with somebody that had the resources to take the time and book the flight and come down here. But yeah, I mean, that exists now.
What do your peers in your practice think about it? Are they getting a lift from your activity?
Yeah, I mean, I have peers and partners in my practice, and just by definition, we lift each other. Because I have people that come to see me because they saw me on social media, and really what they have, their condition, is not something that I deal with. So I was like, okay, no, this is not something that I should help you with. Good news, I've got a partner who's a specialist at this. We're going to get you plugged in and make this happen.
One of the pieces of information that I saw recently and shared with you is, and I forget the number, I should have printed this out, but it's like this knee replacement, this joint replacement was the number $13 billion industry nationwide?
I want to say it was more than that.
Really?
Yeah, we're at over 1 million primary knee replacements in the U.S. annually now. It is the most common elective procedure in the country.
Knee replacements are?
Yes.
What's second?
For elective procedures, I don't know.
Would it be hips?
Hips for us, I could have this number wrong, but I want to say it's somewhere between 600,000 and 800,000.
And part of the same piece of data that I shared with you is that 100,000 of the joint replacements that are done annually fail. What happens to make something fail?
Well, and in fairness, I don't know that you have 100,000 of those million that are failing. I don't think we have that 10% failure rate, but what you have are 100,000 or more that are being redone every year that are the accumulated failures, if you will, of the last 30 and 40 years.
That's what time does to a knee, a fake knee.
Just joints that wear out. And we've had this huge surge of those patients that have had those procedures. And so by definition, some percentage of them do wear out. They do fail for one reason or the other and then have to be revised. So that's a naturally growing segment just because of the success and the proliferation of primary joint replacement.
So somebody 30 years ago had a knee replaced, and today they're coming back in to get it updated, for lack of a better term, knee 2.0 or 3.0. Is the new technology preventing that, such that if I have a knee replacement today, I won't need another one?
Yes, is the short answer. With knees, probably the biggest issue as you went even into I'm going to say the mid to even late 90s were failures of the polyethylene, the plastic that was in the knee replacements. And we've learned a lot about those. And over the last 2 decades, those materials have been a lot better so that we see great survivorship of 20, 25 plus years for a lot of knee replacements now. So that should be preventing that in a large number of those cases.
When we come back from break, Dr. Barber, I want to talk a little bit about staying sharp as a doctor. And I'll begin with a story that is personal and true. And I'm going to ask you what it takes to stay sharp and stay cutting edge. In the studio today, Dr. Matt Barber, orthopedic surgeon. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. We'll be right back.
Is paying a real estate agent worth the money? I'm Angelo Di Paola, the Coastal Connection with eXp Realty. Great real estate agents are like the best doctors. They listen deeply, make your goals their own, stay current on trends that impact your decisions, and have experience navigating unexpected situations. We help our clients make the best real estate decisions along the Gulf Coast. Google me, Angelo Di Paola, the Coastal Connection.
Customer service never goes out of style. In fact, I think it's safe to say that customer service is more valuable and more important now more than ever. Hi, this is Cam Marston. One thing that my over 200 episodes of What's Working has taught me is how important customer service is to building and maintaining a thriving business. It's the growing need for customer service that's led me to partner with one of the state's leading customer service trainers to create our program called Delivering 5-Star Customer Service. Your team will get one 90-minute training session per month for 6 consecutive months. Each session builds on the skills learned the previous month, allowing your customer-facing teams to practice before moving on to the next lesson. And the 6 lessons address everything from appearance to electronic communications to conflict resolution to maintaining a service mindset. Our program travels and is delivered in person at your workplace, nothing virtual. You simply can't practice the level of the skills this course teaches virtually. For more information, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's schedule a time to talk. Remember, you have less to fear from outside competition than you do from discourtesy and bad service from inside your own company. Again, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's talk about your business. In the studio today, Dr. Matt Barber. He's come in very early, hard to get on this guy's schedule due to the fact that he got some cutting and banging to do later today, I guess.
A little bit.
And he's brought in some demo models of knees and templates to put those knees in. I assume, Dr. Barber, that it takes some training to do this, and this is what I was alluding to prior to the break, and I want to tell you a quick story, no names, and then ask you, what does it take to stay sharp? When I had a son with an elbow problem and from a bicycle wreck and went into a practice group, and I'm not going to say who. One of the surgeons in that group went out into their car as they saw us in there with a specific doctor. This was years and years and years ago now, and called from their car my neighbor and said, I want you to know that he is in there with his son. You need to call him and tell him to not go back to that doctor. This was a partner of this doctor's. I mean, this is taboo in your practice. And I still don't know who made that call. I don't want to know. But the message was, this guy is not staying sharp. He's using methods and technologies that are dated and that are going to do more harm than good to that boy. So advise your neighbor to not do that. Which brings me to the question. If I walk in with my son or any of my children, my wife, or even me today, I have no idea what technology is current. I have no idea what practices are current. I'm in a vulnerable emotional state, and I'm looking for somebody who has confidence, a tone of voice, eye contact. All that stuff is telling me he or she knows what they're doing. But in truth, they could be using a practice on my arm, my knee, my elbow, my back that was determined unhealthy decades ago. I have no idea. I'm vulnerable to perceived expertise, which leads me finally to the question, What do I, as a patient, as a customer, need to know that my doctor is staying sharp, is on the front edge of the game, that is using current best practices?
Yeah, so it's a tough question. And just like in that situation, you were advised with the help of friends. So that's a big one. The other related to your thought process about the confidence of that doctor and how they speak and how they answer your questions is just ask. You can always take that direct approach of, how often do you treat this? Do you specialize in this? What are your outcomes with this? What's going to happen? If they don't seem pretty ready with answers, that might be a red flag. And then sort of what we got into earlier a little bit is social media is it's a mixed bag, but it's not terrible at this because you can source a lot of opinions pretty quickly with that, and you can try to validate who someone is and what they do. And a lot of that is, as times have changed and specialization has evolved more and more, you hopefully have the expectation that people are staying up to date. You know, I do literally probably 3 to 4 operations all the time.
Yeah.
I specialize in that. And so everything is laser focused on those few things, and you will continue to see more and more of that. And hopefully that keeps people where they need to be.
So I know that I suspect that there are likely continuing education credits or whatever demanded of you on an annual or semi-annual basis. But even then, I deliver workshops and seminars, et cetera, that give people the credits that they need. I was in financial services earlier this week, and they got credits for being there. But it doesn't mean they were paying attention. They're in the room. They got their badge scanned, but it doesn't mean they were paying attention.
100%.
What does it take? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
not at all.
What is asked of you in your surgical? We'll focus on orthopedics, where I'm sure you have the greatest expert. What is asked of the orthopedics by the industry, the profession, to stay sharp?
So exactly to your point, we're, as licensed physicians and surgeons, required a certain amount of continuing medical education by the state on an annual basis. That varies a little bit from state to state. You'll have a particular number of hours. For board certification, there are similar requirements in terms of hours, sometimes some maintenance of certification, testing, or continuing education along the way. And quite frankly, to your point, a lot of that is or can be hot garbage. We do.
I love that expression. I'm stealing hot garbage.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, those are the things that we do and we have to do to check the box. And I don't know that our specialty boards or state organizations are necessarily keeping bad actors out of play. Hopefully the worst offenders they're culling out, but that is a very imperfect system. Back to your point of staying sharp, for me, it's conferences, it's educational events, but it's just spending time with other surgeons that I know and have validated that these are, right thinking people who are engaged and who are actively seeking good solutions. And I've got a handful of people around the country that I can bounce something off of any time of day or night. And I try to go and spend time with people and in their ORs and just looking around and just taking it all in and what are they doing and trying to, quite frankly, engage with some number of people that think about things a little bit differently than I do, or that I don't want this to become an echo chamber where I hang out with surgeons that just do things like I do. I want to go out and seek out those other opinions and those other ways of doing things.
Is there policing within surgical practices where the peers and the colleagues will say to someone, hey, listen, man, you're falling behind. The technology is advanced and you've done nothing different. Is there a peer system? I can imagine because, and I've said this before and I don't wish to offend you, but orthopedists are a bunch of very confident people. They have a stereotype that I find more often than not is fairly true. They're athletic, they're competitive, and they want to win, they want to be the best. So saying something like that to a peer colleague could be, you're opening up a rift there. Do you sense there's any policing internally within practices?
In a perfect world, yes, but those are very specific situations, and I would tell you that orthopedics and really all of medicine does not do an amazing job of that.
Yeah.
Calling out colleagues on particular things is dicey, and you've got people that are competitors and can use those sorts of things or accusations about quality to try to minimize a competitor. So it really is a situation that demands a high level of ethics from everybody involved to try to do the right thing consistently.
So it's not done much, and I understand that. It makes sense to me. But talk to me, if you will, about what questions. We're going to get out of that topic and get into something else. As you look at the practice of what it is that you do, orthopedics and particularly your specialty, what questions remain? What is out there that you say, boy, if we could solve this would truly change the quality of life for my patients? Or if we had more information about this or this, whether it's your specialty or whether it's in medicine completely, what are the big questions that remain out there?
So I'll stay in my lane here, knees and hips. As you look at these statistically, these are overwhelmingly successful procedures. Hip replacement especially is one of the greatest operations in medicine, statistically overwhelmingly successful. So we're reaching the top of that curve of how good can we get at this. We keep pushing to try to get to 100% success. I think in knee replacement there is a small percentage of dissatisfaction in terms of knee replacements that don't feel natural or that don't function exactly like we would want, and we don't always know why, where there's not a clear problem. So I think diagnosing and figuring out the cause of some of those outcomes that aren't bad, but they aren't, really that home run that we were looking for.
So the patient essentially says, yes, I'm able to walk again. The knee's working, but it just doesn't feel the same. Is that what you're referring to?
Correct. So if you look at those statistically, you've got a very small single-digit percentage group that have a true complication. An implant comes loose, a bone fractures, they have an infection, they have something that's very clear that the patient and the surgeon recognize as going wrong. But there is a small group that are dissatisfied. You've got this great majority that are like, this is amazing, I love this, I wish I'd had this done 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But there are a small percentage like, this just doesn't feel right. And we don't know, is that a mismatch of their expectations?
Yeah. Because
these surgeries are not a time machine. They're not going to make you 20 years old again. This is not like what God gave you. But what is the cause for that small group? So I think we spend a lot of time in my subspecialty dealing with that. And I think our moonshot in joint replacement is infection.
Interesting.
It's not a huge percentage, but it's a devastating complication when it happens that requires a lot of resources to address.
Somebody out there is listening. How can they find you?
BarberTotalJoint.com is my website.
BARBER?
Yes, sir. And if you're just got something specific and want to reach out, BarberTotalJoint at alortho.com is my email.
Thank you, Matt. We'll be back after this with final comments. You're listening to What's Working.
At Roy Lewis Construction, we're in the business of adding value. Whether it's working with you to meet your unique business needs or making investments in our community in lasting ways, providing unparalleled value and quality in every commercial construction project. When planning your next commercial project, reach out to Roy Lewis Construction. We'll pair you with a designer that best suits your project needs and work with that designer to balance the best architectural outcome with the best budget outcome. Find us online at roylewisconstruction.com, building legacies one relationship at a time.
You may have heard as I tried to throw Dr. Barber some curveballs, test him a little bit. He never flinched. I sat there and watched him here in the studio. He's gone now. He never flinched. And the word that I told him is, Matt, you're unflappable. I think he could make an incision in a patient and a snake would crawl out of that incision and he would not blink. He would not flinch. He's absolutely unflappable. And the confidence that he carries in his work is exactly what I would want as a vulnerable patient in a position of not knowing whether I needed a knee that's long overdue or was in a moment of trauma. He carries himself with extraordinary confidence and capability and an impressive dude. Look him up. Follow him on social media and you'll see more of what I'm talking about. Very, very impressive. It's always interesting to ask these guests who I feel like are at the top of their game, what remains to be learned? What is the unknown out there? And it's a moment that kind of always catches them off guard. It's kind of one of my, if you're a regular listener to the show, it's one of the standard questions that I enjoy asking that allows, and I can watch the guests, particularly we're using Zoom on all the non-in-person interviews, but certainly in the studio, watch them ruminate for a moment. And watch where their eyes go. This stuff means something to me, is where they look when they think, and really go deep into their thoughts and come back with something. And that's exactly what Dr. Barber did as he and I were in the studio having this conversation. Very interesting that the moonshot, as he referred to it, is infection. And I guess that's an admission of here's what we don't know. And that's kind of what you want to see in people, is just a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of here's an admission of stuff that we don't know. Dr. Barber, if you're listening out there, thank you for your time. That was very educational. And thank you again for bringing those knee samples in for me. I found that fascinating stuff. It would be interesting to feel one of these metal ones that is actually used in a patient. How heavy is it? What does it feel like in my hands? You can't bring me one and say, hey, I can't let you handle this too much. I got to use it in surgery in an hour. That certainly wouldn't be possible. But it would be interesting to feel that. While Dr. Barber and I were on the air, I got an email from an upcoming guest. I'll pull it up real quick, tell you a little bit about what we can expect. Heike is the president of Outokumpu. He is not the local president here in Alabama. He's in Finland. And he and I are scheduling a radio show. And he's going to talk about the global steel market. And he kind of wants to know the direction our conversation will take, which is the purpose of the email. But that's one that I'm looking forward to coming up. He is really not all that far from all the activity in Europe. It takes a lot of energy to melt steel. And we'll talk a bit to him about the energy resources that they have and what the future looks like in Europe. We'll talk to him about who's buying this and what the different recipes, I'm not sure if he'll call it a recipe, but what the recipes are for different types of steel and their different purposes. He will be probably the most influential CEO I've had on the show. And I'm grateful for his willingness to come on the show. I did a workshop for his team here in Mobile. He was present for the workshop. And when I approached him afterwards to say, would you be willing to be on the radio show? I handed him a book, the What Works book. I told him a little bit about the radio show. He agreed to do so. And you'll find this interesting. Perhaps I've said this before. I said, okay. He said, work with my assistant. She's in Finland. To find time on my calendar. And I thought, all right, I'll get a couple of weeks ahead of me. All I need is an hour of his time. It'll probably be an odd hour of the day due to him being in Finland. He wasn't available for an hour on his calendar until April. And I first asked him his availability in January. What quality of life? We'll talk about that as well, that you can't find an hour on your calendar for a radio interview between January until April. Anyway, I'm looking forward to that. Find me on social media. You can find the podcast at what'sworkingcam.com. The show is produced by John Thompson with Eye on Digital. Love doing this, folks. If you've got guests you think I need to meet, send them my way. what'sworkingcam.com. We'll have another show next week. Have a good week, everybody.